I served on a jury trial for a criminal case last week. It wrapped up Monday. I talked to the defense attorney this morning, and I kind of feel like I finally get it all out, and I can talk about it because it was an extremely unique experience. It was a very emotional experience. It was so many things. And above all, it was a really interesting look at how the whole process works and like what serving jury duty is like. So last Tuesday was jury selection. We started with 47 potential jurors, and it was interesting because I didn't know that when they're doing jury selection, you find out what the case is, because I guess they have to know if there's any conflicts or, whatever. Do you know this person? Do you know that person? Have you been involved in a similar incident? That kind of thing. I mean, it makes sense when you get into it, but these are just things you don't think about. And I'm a talker. And, I always hate it. Like, I always try not to be the first person to answer a question in a room if nobody's answering. But I also just am like, I'm not going to let the silence go on too long. Or if I just really feel like I know something. And so the last break we took before they did the very last cut of jurors from the jury pool, I was really 50-50 because I'm like, they're either going to take me because I'm talking a lot, or they're not going to take me because I'm talking a lot. I really was very unsure. They took me. Also, the nice thing was that during jury selection, I had a very low jury number, so I was sitting in the box, and I was sitting on a comfy chair the whole time, and 15 through 47 had to sit out on the wooden benches, so very relieved that my number was low. But yeah, I got picked, which was a little surprising, but also not super surprising. And so, we didn't do that was pretty much the end of it, because that literally took all day Tuesday. So basically what this case is it kind of sucks because it really was an accident. And what it boiled down to was because it was really hard, because the defendant was a gentleman who was visiting here from California. They had decided to drive to Leavenworth the morning of. They were driving back on Highway 2, which is not a very safe highway. And he got confused, lost spatial awareness, whatever, error in judgment, went into the oncoming lane, struck a motorcyclist. The motorcyclist was killed. So it was hard because I could see all kinds of sides of it. He had his family in the car with him. And I love it here, but there is an outsider bias. There are people that are just very anti-outsider here, and there are people here who are very anti-California, which is really stupid as someone who is not a native Washingtonian. It's you can't have it both ways. Either you grow your community or you don't. I mean, I don't know what you expect. So, also, the defendant was not a white person. And so that, I think, too, didn't help the situation any. So, we hear all this testimony and everything, and I will say, I really think, C+ investigation at best. There's things that the State Patrol could have done and didn't do, and they just, did C+ work, homework-wise, and we're well, this is enough. It'll be fine. I'll still get a decent grade overall. This one doesn't have to be perfect. So there are some things about it that were just ugh, And I was really certain of my verdict, because the whole time, I really thought, it really seemed like this was just an accident, and they might have been really quick to rush to judgment, and, how frustrating that this is, they're just here for the day, and here's the thing. So, the thing I've learned coming from Iowa, moving to Washington, nothing in my previous years of driving in Iowa could have ever given me a sense for what it's like to experience mountain pass driving. And I drove through the mountains in Montana to move here, and that was crazy. And I went to Ellensburg one time last fall, and on my way back, going over Blewett, I realized that my headlight dimmer switch wasn't working right. So I was driving with a hand on the dimmer and a hand on the steering wheel, and that was in November, and it was not a great time to be doing that on Blewett Pass, because it's twisty and windy, and it goes up, 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 and then it goes down. It's a mountain pass. And so even before you really get to Stevens Pass on Highway 2, Highway 2 is windy and twisty, and even though there's some straight spots, it can get really, really dark and dangerous, and people that have lived here a long time just kind of seem to be really kind of blasé about the whole thing. And so basically, we hear the case. So we're picked on Tuesday, we hear the case Wednesday, we hear the case Thursday. They wrap up on Friday morning. And we finally get the case at 12:30. And I was like, I know how I feel. This is how I feel. I'm convinced. I don't know. I just was like, this is how I feel. Because it just seemed to me that everything was so quick to judgment. There were pieces of evidence that they could have obtained and didn't. And it was weird that why they didn't. Gets back to that C+ homework thing. There were just things that were weird. And we were, so we get in there, and then you have to pick a presiding juror. And nobody was really making any, grand gestures to do it. And people were like, nope, don't want it. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. I wanted to do it, but I also was like, I'm not going to just, chomp at the bit to do it kind of thing. But, nobody wanted to do it, apparently. So I'm like, okay, I'll do it. There was one juror that, we did not vibe. 100% did not vibe with her. But you know what? Hey, you take 12 strangers and you put them in a room and they've never met before, and then you give them a very serious issue that they have to agree about and decide upon, and you're gonna have tempers flare and emotions running. And so we get it on Friday, and so I made, I'm like, okay, I'll be the presiding juror. I guess that's what they call it here. And I'm like, well, why don't we just do an initial vote and see? Because maybe we agree. I don't know. I mean, to me, it seemed pretty obvious. It just was I just did not really see how this guy was guilty. Because of something I didn't realize, which I'll get into later. And so we voted, and it was 8-4 not guilty. And I'm like, okay, we are definitely not anywhere near agreement. So, there was discussion. A lot of discussion about so many things. Discussion, emotion, just a lot, about all these details. And we did 3 rounds of voting on Friday. And so we did the first one. And then the second one, somebody was undecided. And then it was 8-3-1. And then the last round was 8-4 again. And so I sent, as the presiding juror, I sent a note, because this was 5 o'clock. So we'd been doing this for 4.5 hours, and at that point I was just like, we're not getting anywhere. It just seemed too contentious. And so we sent a note to the judge, hey, we've gone 3 rounds, what do we do? So they bring us, then we wait. And then they bring us all in to tell us that they want us to keep trying, which, I mean, okay. But at least we now. And they gave us the option to either stay until 7 and try to work on it some more then, or just come back Monday. And we're like, let's just come back Monday. Which I think was probably good, because it kind of gave me the weekend to think about it. Well, it gave us all the weekend. And we all talked. We came in Monday and we're like, yeah, we didn't sleep very well. We thought about it a lot. We took this very seriously, and it affected us very much. It definitely was not a decision or a case or circumstances we took lightly, because it was really serious business. And, I mean, it's not like this guy, the defendant did not have any, criminal or traffic history. This was literally, the one thing that he's ever done wrong, which made it really hard. So we come back in Monday, and we vote, and now we're 7-5, and it's like, oh gosh, okay, this still really split. And I can't remember which juror, and I also, we didn't have name tags, so some jurors I knew who they were and I could remember who their names were, and then other jurors I was like, I think And I even I took a picture of like our seating chart in the jury box, so I wanted to try to remember over the weekend, and then I didn't because there were just too many things in my head. So, sorry. So we get back so we do that, vote, and we're still split. And so someone was like, well, let's reread it. So here is my sage advice for anyone watching this who may find themselves serving on a jury. So you're sitting there with 11 other people that you have not met prior to this case, this situation that you have found yourself in as a dutiful citizen of wherever you may reside. And you're all seemingly very rational, good people, but you're not agreeing. And so somebody had the suggestion why don't we reread the judge's instructions? Because that's what we're supposed to be following. And then to kind of maybe ground ourselves in, what we're doing. And sort of weed through and figure it out. And it's very interesting because you would think that they would write the jury instructions in a way for the jury to understand, but they're written in legalese. So there's a lot of legal language that is very convoluted to explain a very simple thing. So it was like, I don't quite know what this instruction means. So what we ended up doing, and this is my advice, is we went through the instructions, like paragraph by paragraph, instruction by instruction, page by page, and said, okay, what do we think this means? Okay, and then we would write down we would agree on what a simplified meaning of that thing was, and then we would thumbs up if we agreed. And so if we all thumbs up, I agree that that's then we would move on. And so that took us all morning. So we got there at 9:30 and we got done probably about 12:30 or 1 with that. And that really got the ball rolling, because once we figured out what we could agree on, and once we really dove into the instructions and really went through them specifically and made it make sense for us, our job got a lot clearer. And so we ultimately wrote our job is, and then we wrote up what our job was. The other thing I would say that was also really helpful was we used examples to explain it that weren't related to the case. So that way it was more universal. So we were using Bob and Jane and so-and-so, find themselves in a situation. And then we also equated it to a famous case. And so we get done with that. And I'll get back to the point, the linchpin on that one. But so we get done with all of the instructions and we get to where we all agree. And so then we get to going over the evidence that we have. And here is where, had I broken the rules when I talked to my brother last weekend about this, I would not have looked like such a momentary fool, but that's fine. I didn't mind being momentary foolish. So I'm not a person who's ever had really any interest in any kind of motorcycles or anything like that. It's just not a level of risk that I'm personally comfortable with. I'm sure I know a lot of people enjoy it and think it's great. It's just not for me. I feel so I don't know beans about motorcycles is what I'm trying to stammer out to you. And so we're looking at the evidence photos and a couple of interesting things. So the damage to the vehicle had been the driver's headlight and the driver's side. And so to my mind, I was thinking, oh, he was trying to get out of the lane because he was because of where he struck. Other funny, not funny, but not so funny story. One of the pieces of evidence was the motorist who perished was their identification, and he was born 20 days before my brother. So that was a little bit of a trip. It didn't factor into my decision per se, but it did help make his side relatable, I will say. So here's where I look like a complete moron. I did not know that, and I'm being honest, I did not know that motorcycles don't drive in the middle of the lane. I didn't realize they go in these lanes. I thought they were like cars and they went like this. But they go like this. which was a big revelation because that's where I was suddenly a lot less certain about my verdict, because I had been under the impression he was trying to swerve to avoid a head-on collision, but he didn't. And what it came down to when we looked at the instructions and looked at the task that we were charged to do as jurors, even though that was obviously not how he intended for that drive to end up, he still did it. And even though he didn't know it at the time, his actions ended up constituting an illegal action. So even though he didn't know it and didn't intend to do it, he still broke the law. And that was a really hard fact to face, because I had to change my way of thinking. I was feeling pretty sure that this was just some kind of misunderstanding. I still think there were a lot of things that were extremely screwed up. So I sent a note because I thought the presiding juror had to read the verdict, and I wasn't, when I realized I had to change my mind, I was sobbing because it was just so emotionally overwhelming, and it was really hard because it was like I had really tried to see all sides of it, and I couldn't ignore the facts smacking me in the face. It was just from a legal criminal standpoint, I was tasked, my obligation was to find him guilty by the letter of the law. And that was really hard to decide. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to decide in my life, and I'm currently 46. And it was really hard just because it's like, I'm not a perfect driver. Nobody's a perfect driver. And I've had lapses in judgment that certainly did not go as poorly as it did for this person. And so that was really hard. And so we did switch. It turns out the judge reads the verdicts, and I didn't have to have switched as the presiding juror, so I should have just asked if I had to read the verdict or not. So we didn't, but how would you know? And so, so we finally submitted it on, Monday, and I think we got out at 5:30, and the judge came back and talked to us. And the cool thing was that we had been using the big pieces of paper that you can stick on the wall and to organize our thoughts and to write out our definitions for the things we were trying to decide. And we had purposely taped them on the back of the door to the room and then the wall that the door opened to. So that way, whenever court staff had to open the door, they wouldn't see what we were doing. And so the judge came in and turned around, looked at the room and went, wow. Because I don't think he expected to have, we really broke it down. We put a lot of thought into it. We all talked about how we hadn't slept well, that this had been weighing on our minds. So that was hard. It was definitely, like I said, I was sobbing because it was just really hard, because I was so sure of my verdict up until I wasn't, up until the facts proved me wrong. And that's hard. It's hard to admit when you're wrong in a group. And here's kind of my thing. I need to drink water. So my thing is, so we gather citizens together to sit on a jury and to decide this person's fate based on the letter of the law. And the thing that kept coming up, and came up today as well in the conversation I had, is this sense of, well, we know it's a dangerous road. And it's yes, but we're locals, and we know it's a dangerous road. This person was not a local. And I'm a person that, I wouldn't say enjoys. Enjoy seems like a weird word. But I have found myself going down rabbit holes of reading NTSB reports after major incidents, because some of the reason they do those reports is to say, okay, here's what happened. What can we do to mitigate the risk so this doesn't happen again? And so I have to wonder, and I posed this to the defense attorney when I spoke with him this morning. I said, what are we doing as citizens to mitigate the risk for people who come here and don't know how risky it is? Because I have more than one person throughout the course of this experience that just had some kind of offhand remark about various mountain passes and driving, and just like very blasé attitude about how people die on these roads. And then I went and looked up, and I had to do, this was a very surface level search, so nothing in depth, but I went and looked, and I just searched Highway 2, collisions. And I tell you, they're not always fatalities. But so often, people in crashes on at least Blewett and Stevens passes, so US 97 and US Highway 2, usually one of the involved vehicles is not from here. They're tourists. We live in a tourist area. And people get this attitude of like hating the tourists but loving the things that the tour, like the economy the tourists stimulate. And it's just like, are we doing enough as citizens of this local community to mitigate the risk for people who want to visit our community? Are we telling them? Are we informing them of the risk that they might potentially take? Because it is dark. Dark out there. I've been on that highway when it wasn't dark. And I've been on Blewett when it was dark. And the mountain pass darkness is like no other darkness I've experienced. It's certainly nothing you can come close to experiencing in Iowa that I can think of anyways. Because it's not only like the trees, it's the trees and the mountains. And I mean, you're just surrounded, and it is dark and it is remote. And that's the thing too. It's so remote, it takes forever for services to get there. So it it takes forever for whenever there's an incident for things to respond, then you got to get the road open. And it's like, are we doing enough to prevent these from happening in the first place by letting visitors know, hey, you want to be careful going over Stevens Pass. You want to be careful going over Blewett Pass, even if it's the middle of the summer. It's really dark out there. They're still dangerous. And I don't know that we are. And he really seemed to like that. He really appreciated that. He kind of agreed. Like, yeah, because he'd even said, there's some passes he knows he shouldn't drive. And I'm like, but that's the thing. We're locals. We know this. Isn't it our job as a community? So. But yeah, so didn't expect to kind of have that sort of. But yeah, it was really kind of a perfect storm because I could relate to the defendant. I could relate to the motorcyclist who was killed. It was just crazy. And it was, I wouldn't say it was a good experience. It was as good as it could be for what it was. One of the other jurors made everybody sourdough, like we all got a loaf of sourdough bread, which was delicious and amazing. Thank you if you ever come across this video. I don't know that you will, but if you do. And yeah, it was a crazy experience, a really intense look at how the process works. And like, I just had to go with the facts. Ultimately, once I stripped all the emotion away, which was really hard to do. It was really hard for a lot of us to do that. But once we figured out where we agreed and what we agreed on, we found it easier to agree on more things and to come to a greater collective understanding. And I'm really proud of what we did. I mean, again, I didn't know these people, 2 weeks ago. So, but yeah, so it'll be interesting. The sentencing is next month. If it doesn't change, I'm going to try to go just because I kind of want to see how this thing wraps up. But, yeah, it was a tough duty, but I was proud to do it. It was my duty to do it as a citizen. And it is illegal if you do not serve on jury duty. So why start a life of crime now at this point in my life, right? So there you go. But yeah, that is my jury duty experience. It was an interesting one, that's for sure.